Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today, we are diving into the book Clean Disruption of Energy and Transportation. In this explainer, we're unpacking Tony Seba's incredibly provocative 2014 thesis. He argued that the $8 trillion fossil fuel and legacy car industries are facing imminent, tech-driven extinction by the year 2030. And listen, this isn't just about gradual, feel-good green improvements. We are talking about a bold, futurist vision, completely grounded in hard-nosed economics that totally challenges everything we know about how we move and how we power our lives. So let's just jump right in. What if everything you thought you knew about the future of energy actually became obsolete 10 years ago? Before we get into the mechanics of this massive economic shift, we really need to completely reframe our thinking. We've got to shift our minds away from viewing this as some debate about environmental policy or government regulations. Instead, we need to look at it as pure, unstoppable market disruption. These old industries aren't losing because governments are banning them. They are losing because a fundamentally better, vastly cheaper product now exists. To simplify a really complex economic reality, Seba uses this classic quote, and I absolutely love it. He says, the fossil fuel era won't end because we run out of oil, just like the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It's going to end because digital bits and clean electrons are simply becoming exponentially cheaper and just vastly superior to extracting and burning physical atoms. We're talking about a massive shift from a system of scarcity to a system of total abundance.
All right, let's get into section 1, the energy Kodak moment.
To truly wrap our heads around what's happening to the massive oil, gas, and coal industries right now, we have to look back at the historical precedent of technological extinction. Think about how insanely fast digital cameras decimated film processing. It sent Kodak from being an untouchable global titan straight into bankruptcy. Or think about how quickly smartphones completely wiped out landline telephones. Seba argues that the exact same inevitable, rapid adoption rate is currently obliterating our traditional power grids and combustion engines. This is not a slow transition. It's a brutal Silicon Valley-style disruption coming right for these legacy atom-based industries.
And that brings us to a really crucial concept, the S-curve disruption. Utility monopolies and legacy automakers generally rely on incremental, linear thinking, right? They expect things to change slowly, step by step. But Silicon Valley disruptions, they ride these exponential S-curves. They start off super slowly, hit this massive tipping point, and then just absolutely skyrocket, catching those legacy industries completely off guard. It's literally the difference between walking up a hill and stepping into a high-speed elevator.
Moving right along to section 2, the Silicon Valley convergence.
Disruptions of this massive $8 trillion magnitude rarely happen because of one single scientific breakthrough. They happen when multiple, totally independent technologies mature and collide all at the exact same time. There's this predictable cost curve drop, known as Wright's Law, which basically says costs fall predictably as cumulative production doubles. And following that law, 4 specific technologies are converging simultaneously right now: solar power, wind, massive battery storage, and electric autonomous vehicles. This convergence is what threatens to replace our old, centralized, scarcity-driven power system with an abundant, highly intelligent, distributed network.
Which takes us to section 3, the end of car ownership.
Let's shift gears to transportation for a second, where these big macroeconomic predictions turn into something that directly impacts what's sitting in your driveway right now. The absolute secret weapon of the electric vehicle is its staggering lack of mechanical complexity. Think about this. A traditional internal combustion engine has roughly 2,000 moving parts. An electric vehicle, it has about 20. 20. That means electric drivetrains can literally last for 500,000 miles with almost zero maintenance. Once the total cost of ownership crosses parity, rational consumers are going to switch incredibly fast. The economic inevitability of EV dominance is crystal clear. But the hardware is actually only half the story here. When you realize that the average car today sits completely idle 95% of the time, the sheer economic absurdity of individual car ownership becomes glaringly obvious. We're all paying tens of thousands of dollars for machines that do absolutely nothing for the vast majority of their lifespan. And that leads us directly to this game-changing concept, transportation as a service, or TAS. Honestly, why pay $40,000 for a hunk of metal that just decorates your driveway when you could easily summon a self-driving EV for pennies per mile via an app on your phone? Because these autonomous fleets can run constantly and last for hundreds of thousands of miles, the cost per ride just completely plummets. Sebas predicts the shift will be so profound that owning a gas car will eventually feel like owning a horse. A luxury hobby, not a daily necessity. And as a crazy bonus, this model would render up to 80% of our current city parking spaces completely obsolete.
Now, Section 4, the utility death spiral.
While autonomous fleets are out there revolutionizing our roads, a similarly brutal structural trap is quietly closing in on the traditional energy grid. It's called the utility death spiral, and it is a vicious, inescapable cycle. Here's how it works. First, customers adopt cheap rooftop solar and home battery storage. Because they're now generating their own power, the utility monopoly loses revenue. To cover their massive fixed costs, the utility is then forced to raise rates on the users who are left. Well, those higher rates suddenly make solar look even more attractive to the holdouts, causing even more customers to defect. Centralized power plants simply cannot escape this trap using their traditional incremental business strategies. This whole dynamic flips the entire grid architecture upside down. Your rooftop solar and your EV battery turn you into a prosumer, someone who both produces and consumes energy. Seba points out that this distributed network will eventually create the era of what he calls superpower. Because solar and wind generate so much excess energy during peak times, and your batteries store it up, the marginal cost of electricity is eventually going to drop to near zero. Energy actually becomes abundant, not scarce. And finally, Section 5, the 2030 reality check. So, sitting here in 2026, we are just 4 short years away from Seba's incredibly bold 2030 deadline for full disruption. It's time for an objective reality check. For investors, governments, and massive pension funds, the rise of clean tech creates a $100 trillion existential threat known as stranded assets. These are the coal plants, natural gas pipelines, and oil fields that were paid for under the assumption they'd be used for decades. But now, they're rapidly losing their value prematurely because the market has just completely moved on. The big question is, how much of our legacy energy infrastructure is already effectively worthless? Let's look at how his predictions are holding up today. Seba was highly accurate about the exponential drop in solar and battery costs. In fact, solar costs fell even faster than he predicted. And he was entirely accurate that EVs would become a mainstream market force. But we have to remain intellectually honest and look at the whole picture here. The complete collapse of global oil demand, that's definitely lagging behind his aggressive timeline. And the elimination of grid infrastructure bottlenecks has also been much slower than expected. Real-world physical constraints, tricky material supply chains, and super complex geopolitics have kept oil demand from entirely collapsing just yet. The disruption is undeniably happening, for sure, but the physical world sometimes moves just a little bit slower than the digital one. So as this massive S-curve of clean disruption continues to accelerate toward 2030 and beyond, you really have to ask yourself, how are you positioning your own life and your assets for literally the most profound economic transition of our lifetime? Are your investments tied up in stranded assets, or are you preparing for this new era of energy, abundance, and transportation as a service? It is going to be a fascinating shift to watch unfold. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.